I'm Peter Berg, and I run the International Security Program here. It's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce our guest, Nelly Lahoud, who is a senior fellow here at New America. Nelly has just published a paper about the contested relationship between Iran and Al-Qa'ida, which she's going to preview with you right now. She was the lead author. You may recall that when the Abbottabad documents were released for the first time by the Obama administration, Nelly and a group of people at West Point were given the documents by the Obama administration, and Nelly was the lead author on a paper that West Point published from the Counterterrorism Center at West Point, which really unpacked a lot of the material that was in the first tranche of releases. Now, as you know, in January, the Trump administration released all 470,000 documents. It's a little bit of a misleading figure, I think, because many of those documents are multiple versions of the same document. Bin Laden would draft something 50 times, and a lot of those documents are really actually newspaper articles. Anyway, so over to Nelly. She will talk about the key findings of the paper, and then we'll have a discussion with her. Thank you.
Many thanks, Peter, for this kind introduction, and of course, thanks to you for all the wonderful and constructive suggestions that you made on the paper, and a special thanks to David Sturman, whose ruthless but very constructive feedback and fact-checking were really improved the paper. And of course, thank you all today for your interest. Now, my presentation consists of 3 parts. I'm going to start by briefly noting the uniqueness of the declassified documents recovered by US Special Forces in Osama bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, and upon which this study is based. The second part, I'm going to allow the documents to tell the story of this contested relationship between Al-Qa'ida and Iran, and this will include why some jihadis decided to flee to Iran following the fall of the Taliban regime, how Al-Qa'ida smuggled personnel and money through Iran, when Iran first reached out to Al-Qa'ida seeking to connect with bin Laden and why, and bin Laden's unfiltered views about Iran as he communicated them in his letters to his wife Hamza, and later with other members of his family in Abbottabad during the weeks before he was killed. And then I promise the concluding section will be very, very brief. Now, starting with the uniqueness of the Abbottabad documents. Now, this audience is well aware that Al-Qaeda's ties to state actors is a recurring theme in the counterterrorism community. Iran, but also Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, have all been accused of enabling Al-Qaeda to advance their respective interests. Generally, the story of Al-Qaeda's ties to these states is told either through the accusatory lens of those who believe that these states have conspired to enable Al-Qaeda, or through the defensive lens of each of these states, including Iranian officials accusing Saudi Arabia, and vice versa when Saudi officials accuse Iran. In recent months, Iran has come under particular scrutiny as a result of debates surrounding the Iran deal or the JCPOA. When President Trump announced earlier this year in May that the Iran deal must be either renegotiated or terminated, he referenced in his statement Iran's support for Al-Qaeda. The missing voice in this story is that of Al-Qaeda, and this is where this report comes in. Now, we've heard Al-Qaeda's leaders criticize Iran in some of their public statements, but the reason the Abbottabad documents examined in this study are unique is because they were never intended to be for public consumption. Instead, they consist of internal correspondence among Al-Qaeda's leaders, their families, and jihadis in their orbit. As such, a close examination of the Arabic documents provides an unparalleled window into Al-Qaeda's inner workings and allow us to avoid much of the challenge of politicization that occurs when discussion of Iran's relationship to Al-Qaeda is based on commentaries by Iran's rivals. Since 2012, the intelligence community has been declassifying these documents, and as Peter noted, first through the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point, then on the website of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and in November last year, the CIA declassified most of what was recovered during the raid, nearly according to the website, 470,000 items. Of these, over 24,000 are files in PDF format. And as Peter noted, not all of these are internal correspondence. Now, the CIA did not provide translation for the newly declassified documents it released. The Office of the DNI had done so for the previous ones. The quality of the translation varies. Sometimes it is incomplete. For the purpose of this study, I read nearly 300 internal communiques. The length of these vary from 1 page to over 200 pages. My analysis is based on the original Arabic, and the parts that I cite are my own translation. The dates of the internal communiques that reference Iran and that I cite in this study range from 2004 through Sunday evening, 1st of May, 2011, hours before bin Laden was killed. So let me turn to the second section, the second part of my presentation, which is really the juicy part about the documents. When I was reading the documents, I was particularly interested to see if Al-Qa'ida collaborated with Iran with the express purpose of carrying out international terrorism. This I did not find. Instead, I found numerous hostile references towards Iran, but the documents allowed me to get a sense as to why Al-Qa'ida wanted to avoid a confrontation with Iran and discern a pragmatism that allowed it to manage and even suppress this hostility. One of the documents declassified by the CIA in November last year is a valuable anonymized 19-page document dated January 2007, and it stands out for providing an internal description of Al-Qaeda members and jihadis in Iran and how the Iranian government dealt with them. This document was highlighted by analysts writing for the Long War Journal who were given advance copy of many of the files by the CIA, but they didn't give it the analysis that it deserves. The study published today gives a detailed textual analysis of this 19-page document. Judging by the content, it appears that just as the United States found the presence of some Al-Qaeda members in Iran to be objectionable, some jihadi leaders were similarly disturbed. In view of Al-Qaeda's public enmity of Iran, some jihadi sheikhs seem to have asked fellow jihadis to explain themselves. The 19-page document is intended to explain what happened. My guess is that the author is an Al-Qaeda operative. It is written by a jihadi for senior jihadis. And the author explicitly instructs his readers to treat his report بِغَايَةِ السِّرِّيَّة, with utmost secrecy. Early in the report, we get to sense the author's hostility towards Iran when he asserts that while the United States is the current enemy of the jihadis, the Iranians are the postponed enemy. According to the document, jihadis headed to Iran out of necessity, and the relationship they sought with Iran was limited to allowing jihadis either to pass through Iran or to reside there temporarily. The first wave of jihadis to enter Iran was led by Abu Hafs al-Mauritani. You may recall that Abu Hafs al-Mauritani was the head of Al-Qaeda's legal committee, and he later claimed that he left Al-Qaeda because he disagreed with the 9/11 plans. Now, we find out from the document that al-Mauritani had the authorization of Qiyadat al-Azma, the crisis leadership, to reach an understanding with the Iranians permitting jihadis to pass through Iran or to reside there. This authorization did not come from bin Laden or Ayman al-Zawahiri. The author remarks that no contact had been made with these two leaders after the Battle of Tora Bora. So by the time this author of the 19-page document was writing in January 2007, he tells us that the jihadi experience in Iran had progressed through 3 different phases. The first phase began in late 2011, following the fall of the Taliban regime, and lasted for a few months until early 2002. During this phase, Iranian authorities provided safe passage for jihadis and their families who were allowed to reside temporarily, particularly in the city of Zahedan. And al-Mauritani, with the support of Iranian authorities, was able to process the safe passage of many of the jihadis, particularly from the Arabian Peninsula, that is Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, managing to send them off to their home countries or to other countries like Syria. The Saudi embassy in Tehran was involved in this endeavor. In return, Iranian authorities demanded that jihadis comply with security conditions that they set. Among these, he indicates that jihadis were forbidden to communicate by phone, and I'm quoting, refrain from any activities, movements, or form assemblies that would attract attention, end of quote. Now, if Iranian authorities did indeed set these conditions, then one can surmise that Iran did not wish for jihadis who entered Iran to be operational. The author laments that the jihadis did not keep their end of the bargain. They used mobile phones, purchased cars, formed groupings, and in a short period, they set up guest houses. And on a number of occasions, he adds, they went outside the Zahedan and they set up special telecommunications antennas and established, I'm quoting, direct contact with the brothers in Chechnya. Following the jihadis' violation of the terms set by the authorities, everything changed, the author wrote. And a second phase ensued, lasting from early 2002 until around March 2003, around the US-led Iraq war. Now, it's helpful to remember that the onset of the second phase coincided with Iran being positioned as part of the axis of evil by the US administration. The author claims that Iranian authorities launched a campaign to arrest members of Al-Qa'ida and other groups without exception, telling them, and I'm quoting, Americans had taped many of your communications, they brought it to us, protested that we are giving refuge to terrorists. The crackdown caused jihadis to flee the grip of Iranian authorities and spread across different Iranian cities, including Tehran, where the author himself and others headed, Isfahan, Mashhad, and Bandar Abbas. Now, how did the jihadis settle in these different cities? Let me quote what the author precisely put it. Everyone began to rent houses through trusted Ahl Sunnah brothers, Sunnis. Many of them, may God reward them, rushed to help their jihadi brothers, urged by the righteous scholars and sheikhs who are loyal to and supporters of the Taliban and Al-Qa'ida. So each group of jihadis was assisted by a few Kurdish or Sunni Baluchi brothers who worked with them to rent houses for families and bachelors alike. In many instances, the brothers forged documents and used fake IDs to rent houses. This is a simple matter in Iran, end of quotation. The jihadis from Gulf countries who were arrested appear to have fared better than most, since most of them were able to leave either on their own or by contacting their embassies in Tehran, or the Iranian authorities sent them off to their home countries. So during the first and second phases, Iran seems to have prioritized processing the nationals of Gulf countries. The Iranian authorities changed their policies with respect to jihadis yet again. The third phase began around the time of the Iraq War. So we are told that as of March 2003, when Iranian authorities arrested jihadis, they did not permit them to leave Iran. Instead, they imprisoned them. They were put in residential buildings guarded with security. Women whose husbands were in prison were placed in 2 special houses without security guards. It seems that family visits were allowed, and on some of these visits, some brothers managed to escape. As to those who were not captured by Iranian authorities, the author tells his readers that they adopted stringent measures to evade getting arrested. They spread across different parts of the country, and they refrained from meeting or sharing one another's addresses. They also avoided the use of mobile phones, minimized their internet use, and limited their interactions with the Sunnis of Iran. It seems that actually the authorities were tracking the Sunnis of Iran in order to get to the jihadis. So what caused the Iranian authorities to shift their policy from deporting jihadis to imprisoning them? Let me quote the author here. We've come to ascertain without any doubt that with the American invasion of Iraq, the fall of Saddam, the beginning of jihad and resistance there, the salient and rapid rise of al-Zarqawi, the emergence of the name of Al-Qa'ida, and the rapid unfolding of events, Iranian authorities decided to keep our brothers as a bargaining chip. End of quotation. So what is the jihadis' leadership of Iran? And here the author reiterates a line common in the Abbottabad documents, which says, again, I'm quoting him, to remain operationally quiet in Iran, not causing any incidents, given that it serves as a passageway for our brothers into Afghanistan, an arena of support for movement and logistics, notwithstanding that this is all being conducted in a clandestine fashion and that its value has recently diminished. End of quotation. In other words, when Al-Qa'ida used Iranian territories to smuggle money and personnel, they were doing so without the knowledge or support of Iranian authorities. Other Abbottabad documents further attest to this, and none of the documents that I examined suggest that Iran was the source of funds or that it was facilitating the smuggling of personnel. Now, you might ask, how was Al-Qa'ida was able to do this? So there is another anonymized document that gives us a glimpse of how this occurred. It was composed either late 2004 or early 2005, and it consists of 15 instructions, most of which were to be carried out by Al-Qa'ida operatives. Several references in the document allude to Iran as the known source, but without explicitly mentioning Iran. One of the instructions to an operative, Abdullah al-Halabi, who could be bin Laden's brother-in-law, but I'm not sure, who was entrusted with secrets concerning the jihadis' work and who may be sent on mission to Iran, is required, and I'm quoting, prepare himself and read the study by Abdelaziz al-Jarboua. It's a study about the legality of committing suicide for fear of disclosing secrets. He should take a small and simple tool that would assist him to commit suicide to avert falling captive should he find himself in an extremely dangerous situation. End of quote. In other words, Al-Qaeda's use of Iranian territories to smuggle money and personnel was considered to be highly dangerous, and it wanted to avoid at all costs having its secrets known by Iran. Now, let me turn to a two-page letter, which was declassified by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And in my view, it's the most important document that I've come across in the collection, in that it suggests that Iran reached out to Al-Qaeda in 2004. While I do not wish to diminish the work of the intelligence community that analyzed the documents, I doubt that the information in this letter was exploited to its fullest. To start with, the letter was released and most likely treated as two separate documents. One page, the second one, was declassified in May 2015, and the other, opening page, was declassified in March 2016. The inconsistent translation of the same keywords, al-umda and al-marda, and I'll say more about it later, used on both pages of the same Arabic letter suggests that the same Arabic two-page letter was translated and analyzed by two individuals who did not make the connection between the two pages. The word al-umda, chief or mayor as translated, was code for word for bin Laden, while al-marda, the sick people, was code for bin Laden's family that was detained in Iran. The letter is addressed to a certain Tawfiq, and it is authored by a certain Hafiz, both of whom are most likely members of Al-Qaeda. It is dated 5/6. Judging by its content, I have dated the letter to Friday, 23rd of July, 2004. At that time, the group At-Tawheed wal-Jihad, headed by Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, referenced in the letter as Al-Azraq, the parent group of today's Islamic State, was suspected of being behind attacks against Shia in Iraq, but had not yet claimed responsibility. According to the letter, Iranian authorities reached out to Al-Qaeda through a wasit, an intermediary, and this intermediary, according to the letter, told Hafiz, and please indulge because I'm going to quote most of the letter here, I'm going to let the letter tell the story. And here I'm starting the quotation. The Iranians are interested in connecting with someone from the side of Al-Umda, bin Laden, and their interest is not limited to the issue of Al-Marda, his family. Rather, in the first place, they are interested in the situation in Iraq, for they believe that the brothers there, specifically Al-Zarqawi and his group, are behind the attacks on the holy Shia sites. That is why the Iranians are keen to meet with a representative from the side of bin Laden to discuss this issue, seek clarification about it, and look into the possibility of cooperating. Further on in the letter, according to the intermediary, the Iranians would be prepared to give some kind of support and assistance if an understanding is reached on some issues that are of importance to them. They need, at the very least, a letter signed by bin Laden in which he gives assurance that the Shia holy sites are not the target of jihadi brothers, and that they are not among the targets that are to be hit. They wanted bin Laden to make it clear that what is happening in Iraq is the result of some erratic behavior on the part of al-Zarqawi, and that bin Laden and his people are not pleased with these attacks and disapprove of targeting such places. End of quotation. Now, Hafiz, the author, informed the intermediary that a letter from bin Laden was not possible, and that he might be able to arrange a letter from one of his representatives. Even so, Hafiz doesn't seem to have much confidence in the exchange and is concerned about the lack of clarity. He told the intermediary, and I'm quoting again, "Until now, we are still not confident or have any knowledge of the situation of bin Laden's family, and it is therefore difficult to work or agree to the terms set by the Iranians under these conditions." End of quotation. He also insisted that Al-Qaeda would not agree to anything unless Iran released one of the patients, one of the bin Laden's family, so that we could assess the situation. Hafiz informed Tawfiq that he would follow up with the intermediary in 3 days, and as a first step, he would ask him, and I'm quoting again, to speak on the phone with one of the patients, bin Laden's family, like Muhammad, the son of bin Laden, or with one of the sheikhs detained there, so that we could ascertain the seriousness of the intermediaries and that of those whom they represent, and also to be able to understand the level of importance the Iranians assign to this issue. End of quote. Despite Hafiz's suspicion as to Iran's willingness to provide reliable information about bin Laden's family, he still recommends that, and I'm quoting, it would be appropriate to have a discussion with them to resolve the issue of bin Laden's family and the possibility of getting some specialized assistance from them, but without entering into any long-term agreements or make promises that we could not keep. End of quote. Now, one cannot conclusively ascertain from the letter that the intermediary was an emissary representing the views of Iranian officials. However, the mere fact that the intermediary had the audacity to seek assurances from none other than bin Laden suggests that he was an emissary for senior Iranian officials who could determine the fate of bin Laden's family. Whatever cooperation meant, and the letter does not say, it is unlikely that it occurred as a result of the intermediary's outreach to Hafiz. Other Al-Qaeda documents intimate that it is only in 2009 that Iran began to release Al-Qaeda prisoners. In a letter authored by the Al-Qaeda leader Atiyatullah al-Libi in June of that year, in 2009, he expresses his delight, and I'm quoting, the Iranians released a group of brothers in several batches last month. And he goes on to say, our efforts, and I'm quoting him, which included escalating a political and media campaign, the threats we made, the kidnapping of their friend, the commercial counselor in the Iranian consulate in Peshawar, and other reasons that scared them based on what they saw we are capable of, to me, among the reasons that led them to expedite the release of these prisoners. End of quotation. His letter suggests that the Iranian authorities did not establish direct contact with Al-Qaeda and that they informed Al-Qaeda of their intent to release jihadi prisoners through an intermediary. In Atiyah's words, and I'm quoting him again, the criminals, referring to the Iranians, did not send us any letter, nor did they send us a message through any of the brothers they released. Such behavior is of course not unusual for them. Indeed, it is typical of their mindset and method. They do not wish to appear to be negotiating with us or responding to our pressures, as if to suggest that their actions are purely one-sided and based on their own initiative. End of quote. Now, between parentheses, going back to that 2-page document that suggests that the Iranians reach out to Al-Qaeda, while the letter really strongly suggests that Iran reached out to Al-Qaeda, other declassified documents reveal that Iran was not the only state to have made such an effort. One letter, one of the interesting surprises of these documents, addressed to bin Laden and authored by Atiyah, dated the 5th of April, 2011, includes a passage suggesting that British intelligence reached out to Al-Qaeda to have an arrangement of their own, a quid pro quo of their own. Atiyah indicates that he received an email from Libyan brother Urwa, who was still in Iran, in which Urwa told him that some Libyan brothers in Britain told him that the British intelligence spoke with them and requested that they try to contact those whom they knew in Al-Qaeda. According to Urwa, British intelligence asked, and I'm quoting, Libyan brothers to propose to their Al-Qaeda contacts that Britain is prepared to withdraw from Afghanistan if Al-Qaeda commits explicitly that it will not carry out any attacks against Britain or its interest. End of quote. CT practitioners may well meditate on this fact. Let me now turn to some of the documents that give an insight into the personal in bin Laden's life, and needless to say, what is personal for bin Laden is often political. Now, one lengthy document allows us to be a fly on the wall, so to speak, in the bin Laden household in Abbottabad. It was declassified by the CIA. It is a long handwritten document. It's very challenging to read. Totaling 220 pages. It has been described as bin Laden's handwritten journal. I don't think it is bin Laden's handwriting. I believe the handwriting is that of bin Laden's daughter, possibly, but not conclusively, Miriam. And the ideas or reflections in the document are not exclusively those of bin Laden. The bulk of the document consists of summarizing and commenting on the news related to the Arab Spring, including transcribing some news program on the BBC and Al Jazeera. Those identified by name are his son Khalid, his wife Hamza, his daughter Miriam, and Sumaya, possibly his daughter. The transcribed sessions we have in this document show these family gatherings as a form of brainstorming, and all involved partake in contributing ideas. For example, the female transcriber mentions an idea she has about restructuring Al-Qa'ida. The document was composed during the last 2 months of bin Laden's life, starting on March 6, 2011, and ending on Sunday evening, the 1st of May, hours before bin Laden was killed. I believe this is the second such notebook. The first one may or may not have been recovered during the raid. So the first one, also, I'm sure it exists. I cannot stress enough how important the events of the Arab Spring were for bin Laden based on this document. They caused him to reconsider Al-Qaeda strategies and the role it should play on the world stage. He was a spectator, not a driver of the events, and understandably, his thoughts were shifting. Though he was hoping and expecting that all the regimes in the Middle East would fall and was trying to find a purposeful role for Al-Qaeda to play during this historical period, at no point did he entertain the thought of collaborating with Iran to hasten the collapse of the regimes. References to Iran are marginal, and they are consistently negative. Iran is mentioned in relation to the events in Bahrain, where Saudi Arabia intervened to put an end to the protests that broke out there. Bin Laden and his family were reviewing the events and positing Iran's response if Saudi Arabia escalated its role in Bahrain. For example, he talks of Iran's policy of ghadr, betrayal. He also expresses concern as to whether Iran would choose to mobilize the Shia in the Gulf. And quoting him, if Iran chooses to escalate, it can, for betrayal is intrinsic to its politics. Now, sticking with the personal, bin Laden's mistrust of Iran and lack of any special contacts with Iranian officials is vividly illustrated in the letters he wrote to members of his family after they were released from detention in Iran in 2010. Upon hearing of their release, bin Laden wrote to them to instruct them that before they head to Abbottabad, they should leave behind everything they brought from Iran, and I'm quoting him, to replace everything the size of which could fit in the eye of a needle, since tiny tracking devices have been deployed and that could be injected even into a pill. Since the Iranians cannot be trusted, it is probable that they would plant a tracking device in some of the belongings that you have brought with you from Iran, end of quote. Now, in another letter addressed to his wife, Hamza, whom he knew had reached Waziristan, bin Laden asks if she has any clues as to why the Iranians released her and the others. And I'm quoting him. Did you hear anything after your release that caused or forced the Iranians to release you in the first place, or in the direction of Waziristan in particular, he asked? In the same letter, bin Laden's mistrust of Iranian authorities reaches another higher level. The letter refers to one that Hamza had written to him, in which she described a treatment she had received in Iran following an episode of extreme dizziness. Bin Laden's initial queries are those that one would expect from a caring husband. When did your dizziness start? How long did it go on for? Please provide more details as to its symptoms. Also include the date when it was diagnosed and treated. As the letter progresses, bin Laden's concerns go beyond routine caring questions. He tells her, it does not escape you the importance of dates when it comes to many medical issues. Realizing that he is pushing for more intimate information that may offend his wife, he adds, please pardon my insistence. Perhaps I am exhausting you with my request for more details. He goes on to ask Hamza to see another female doctor in Waziristan to describe to her the symptoms from which she had suffered, and to ask her to do an X-ray or ultrasound, and I'm quoting, if no alien body is found, then we would have certainty and peace of mind to overcome our doubts. The language about conducting an ultrasound to verify that no alien body is found, along with symptoms of dizziness, put all these together, suggests that bin Laden was worried about a case of pregnancy. Hamza, with was either 60 or 61 at the time bin Laden was writing the letter, so one can assume that he was not accusing his wife of infidelity or alluding to a case of rape that resulted in getting her pregnant at that age. However, he was concerned about the treatment she had received in Iran, and it is possible he feared that the Iranian authorities may have conspired with a medical practitioner to impregnate his wife artificially, perhaps through a hormone treatment she did not know about. This possibility might seem ludicrous, but judging by the mistrust that Al-Qa'ida leaders harbor for Iran, and evident in many of the Abbottabad papers, this possibility would not have surprised them. So I'm going to get to the the third part, concluding remarks, and as I promised, I'm going to be brief. I think the Abbottabad documents that examined in this study provide no evidence that Al-Qaeda's ties with Iran involved operational collaboration. No friendly or familiar references are to be found in any of the documents that I examined. If Iranian authorities supported terrorism carried out by Al-Qaeda, bin Laden didn't know about it. The contention that Al-Qaeda is prepared to serve the agenda of Iran requires some skepticism. Thank you.
Well, that was admirably brief, succinct conclusion. And thank you very much, Nelly. It's fascinating. So talk to us a little bit about, 470,000 documents drop. A lot of them are newspapers. A lot of them are repeats. But, the volume is just enormous. So how did you find that? You mentioned 300 documents that you looked at. Some of them, I guess, had been released already, so you knew to, but how do you winnow, it seems like a massive thing just to identify the documents that are relevant. And of course, many of these documents are written by pseudonymously on both sides often. And so it's hard to know who's talking to who, which pseudonym refers to who. The documents themselves are full of pseudonyms, right, as well. So how do you kind of map all that and make the decisions about which documents are important?
To be clear, I did not go through the 24,000 documents.
Okay.
What I did, because it is specific, the bulk of the documents that I covered for this study are those that had been declassified through the CTC and the Office of the DNI. But I was particularly interested by the handwritten document, which you and I discussed in March, and in that 19-page document that was highlighted by the Long War Journal's analyst. So, but then I went through and I started clicking on these documents randomly. And as you rightly pointed out, many of them are actually from Al-Quds Al-Arabi, Al-Hayat. They're PDF documents that are not.
Because what was happening is the couriers were printing up Al-Quds and then giving it as a PDF to bin Laden? Right?
I think so, because most of the things, there are references that he is getting them not electronically by internet, but they are saved most likely on phones, shara'ah, some of the technical term that you could save it on
thumb drive.
Possibly something,
Yeah.
but they got to him, but there are also videos. There are some, so there are some of the 72,000 files again. Clicked on them randomly about videos and media and so on. It's difficult to, some of the 72,000 files that could have some interesting elements, because in one of them, it was a picture of a specific letter that they got from somewhere about Hamas. So you could see, but it's not from Hamas to them. But you could see some really internal documents. I think the ODNI's documents were very helpful, the way they were released, because they were classifying things. I don't think the translation was helpful if you want to get to the meaning of what the documents were, but they were helpful in the sense these were internal communiques. You know what you were reading, you know what you're getting yourself into. So, but the CIA files are, it's a can of worms, if you want to say, because it's impossible to be able to go through them quickly, and most of the ones that I clicked on, some of them could actually have blank pages. So it's a challenge.
So I think it's a fairly, well, two questions. One is, so The Exile, the book by Kathy Scott Clark and Adrian Levy, has a lot of material about this period. How does, but they had access to some documents, but not all of them when they wrote their book. But they also talked to a Mauritanian who you mentioned. and people in the family. So, and as I recall, having read it quite a long time ago, the picture the exile paints, which is a brilliant book, which you should read if you haven't already, is this house arrest that the Al-Qaeda people were under wasn't at all like the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh kind of house arrest. It seemed like quite a trial. I mean, and also that conditions could kind of improve, and maybe sometime they go shopping, and then suddenly they're back. And some of this seemed to be on military bases, and it seemed to be organized by Soleimani and the Quds Force. Do the documents sort of?
No.
No.
I also very much enjoyed the
Yeah.
exile, and I'm really thankful to Adrian who gave me an advanced copy of the PDF. I think there is enormous valuable information in the book that you will not going to find anywhere. And they interviewed the wives of bin Laden, which is also they really earned their trust for several years before they could get the interviews. But at the same time, I also respectfully disagree with some of the things that they come up with. I don't think that they processed the information. They took many of the things that were told at face value. And so, Al-Mauritani can say whatever he wants to say now. And I think, there are certain things that he would be right about, and I could see that yes, that makes sense. And there are other aspects that do not necessarily make sense. And also, let's not forget that sometimes people aren't going to say everything in their saying, or they switch their story. So I found, because they didn't really interrogate some of the things that they received, you end up having a certain incoherence about the situation. So by the end of the book, you find that Iran is supporting ISIS, it's supporting Nusra, it's supporting Al-Qa'ida, it's supporting Hezbollah. I mean, all of this, and they're all kind of running the show from Iran. I didn't get an internal coherence. There were several stories going on, and I do say, with respect to all the kind of interviews that people do, and these are very, very valuable, but when we do get a document that tells us that in internal documents written by jihadis, for jihadis, I want to privilege that document over a conversation.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, because documents, particularly these, as you said, the documents were not intended for a wider consumption at all. I think they were, often they were intended for maybe two people, right? I mean, but even within Al-Qaeda, I don't think, Atiyah, who's one of the principal recipients and writers to bin Laden, who was his chief of staff, basically, and that wasn't really clear, by the way, until the documents emerged, right? We didn't really know what position he played in the organization, but I don't think they were wanting these documents to go outside just themselves, forget about, a public.
Not.
So the documents are incredibly valuable, and I'm racking my mind, and perhaps somebody in the audience has an answer, but I don't think there's ever been a time where we've had this, this kind of document dump that is so valuable that will really, historians are going to be, hopefully you'll write a book about this, but historians are going to be using these documents for the next, several decades, and it's going to take a long time to unpack them. But but just going back to the question of, because I think it is relevant to the thesis of what you're talking about, which is, how would you describe the treatment that the Al-Qaeda, from the documents, that the bin Laden family members and the Al-Qaeda leaders, and what kind of treatment were they getting in Iran? You mentioned these three phases. Were they living in a hotel? Were they living under house arrest? What were the conditions?
Well, this 19-page document tells us, is very helpful. But also, it's helpful to put things in context. When the jihadis got to Iran at the end of 2001, they got there not with their Kalashnikovs. They were there with women and children. So they got there, and Iran didn't round them up and shoot them. They didn't set up Guantanamo for them. But what they really wanted is to process them out. This is what we got from this first document, the first phase, where they got there. And it seems that other countries were involved in the process. The Saudi embassy is mentioned in that. And they were actually on the lower level of the Basij. The author says that some of the lower level people, they cheered us up because we were the people who attacked America. So on that early stage, Iran wanted to kind of welcome, but then goodbye. The second stage, because they started violating these security measures, and because, you know, we realize from the Iranian perspective, they became part of the axis of evil. They started detaining them, but then also they could process them out. And then as of the start of the Iraq War, and when al-Zarqawi began, in the second phase also, he tells us, the document, that they were treated very respectfully. And they were put in respectful places, but there were security guards. In some instances in hotels, but there were security guards. The women didn't have security guards. But they were treated respectfully, and they would take down a file, they would complete a file about each of the jihadis before they could process them. After the Iraq War, they decided that they were going to keep them. He mentions a number, maybe 3 or 4 people who were released after 2003 because, you know, one of the guys, his wife was about to die or something. They were based on humanitarian reasons. But all of the others, they were arrested with security measures. But the bulk of the people, by that time, many of the jihadis decided that they were going to evade getting arrested by the Iranians and spread across the country. So yes, I didn't find anything negative about the treatment of the Iranians. They don't mention torture, they don't mention, but they weren't going to allow them out. So, there is nothing that would tell us that they were mistreated, but they were not really being supported either. They were not enabled.
Have you looked, just a suggestion which you may already have done, but have you looked at the Senate Intelligence Committee report on the torture and cross-referenced it with, because even in the, there's a great deal of information about that immediate post 9/11 period when, you know, KSM and others went to Karachi and how they organized the movement into Iran. Have you looked at this?
No.
I think it would be useful because it's another kind of way of kind of cross-referencing some of the information. And in fact, you know, I don't know if the Senate Intelligence Committee report has never really been fully exploited by historians because it's so big. But it's much broader than the question of torture because the people who wrote the report, you know, were able to declassify a great deal of the actual sort of post 9/11 history of the interrogations, and the footnotes are a very useful kind of roadmap. So I would recommend that. The other question I had was on the British intelligence. I mean, this is where the documents have a certain limit, right? Because this document says, you know, the British intelligence gave this feeler to a group of guys in London who were associated probably with the Libyan Islamic fighting group, and they've kind of contacted somebody, and we've kind of heard about this. So this is like maybe fifth hand, and because I mean I'm naturally kind of skeptical the British would pull out of Afghanistan and do a deal with Al-Qa'ida. It just doesn't seem super plausible. So I mean the documents themselves need to be treated skeptically, right? I mean if
I mean, perhaps Urwa, the Libyan brother, was making things up. I don't know, but it doesn't. But it doesn't. I'm not sure that Atiyah wants to say he would have come up with it. What surprised me about Atiyah's letter is not that they reached out, that he said we will think about having a suitable arrangement. I would have thought he would have completely dismissed it. So Atiyah, when he speaks about Iran, he's way more hostile than when he spoke about Britain.
Let's say the whole thing's absolutely true, which I think seems unlikely. Sounds like Chinese whispers, but let's say it is true. I mean, obviously, nothing came of it, and that's another interesting thing about these documents is. So, for instance, the potential outreach to the Pakistanis, which got some attention, Al-Qa'ida wanting to do some kind of truce. Well, all we have is just that one side of this discussion, right? It's not clear that any discussion really happened with the Pakistanis.
You know, this is I don't want to get into this subject really extensively, but it's also very complicated with the Pakistanis. And the hostile remarks from Al-Qa'ida against Pakistan, they're littered in the documents. Now, the complication gets in terms of some of the groups that the Pakistanis have used to reach out to Al-Qaeda and to track them at times. So one of the documents about lessons learned is, we did the liability of opening up to Lashkar-e-Taiba, for example, or, we know that the Jaish-e-Mohammadi are talking to us on the basis of the Pakistanis in order to get to us, but they don't even trust them. Al-Qaeda isn't trusting this communication. So it's not, there are essays, how to launch jihad in Pakistan. So I didn't see any symbiotic relationship between Pakistan's state and Al-Qaeda. I mean, bin Laden was in hiding, and
There's no evidence in the documents that he had any connections to the Pakistanis.
With the Pakistani state, no. There are references to Pakistani brothers. There are references to the Haqqanis. There are references to Jaish-e-Mohammadi, Lashkar-e-Taiba, in terms of, but it seems as if Al-Qaeda thinks, in some of the ones that I looked at, it seems as if Al-Qaeda is not really trusting them. They think that they are using, the Pakistanis are using them to get to Al-Qaeda.
I think it's generally accepted that Saif al-Adil ordered in 2003 the kind of campaign that Al-Qaeda mounted in Saudi Arabia. There's nothing in the documents that sort of...
No, I didn't find a reference to this. I mean, it could be there. But again, the Al-Qaeda hates the Saudi establishment. They hate bin Nayef, the counterterrorism center of bin Nayef, and what they did and how they tried to get the religious scholars against Saudi Arabia. There are individuals in Saudi that are funding Al-Qaeda. And this is also another layer that requires further research. But again, I didn't find any connections between Al-Qaeda and officially Saudi Arabia.
Great. So if you have a question, just wait for the mic. We'll start with Barbara Slavin here, and then in front here, Wes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Barbara Slavin from the Atlantic Council, and forgive me, I came in late, so I hope I didn't miss anything. One of the things everything you've said jives with my understanding of the relationship. One thing I wonder about, did you find any reference to the fact that Al-Qaeda believed that Iran was holding these people to use as bargaining chips with the Americans? I think specifically in the run-up to and immediately after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, U.S. diplomats talked to Iranian diplomats about the Mujahideen-e-Khalq that were in Iraq. And Iranians had an expectation that these people might be turned over to them. And in return, the suggestion was they would give the United States Saif al-Adil and bin Laden's son and others. Did you find any reference to that in the documents you saw?
It's very interesting you say that. So the document, the report that is published today is really about Al-Qaeda's voice, and I don't talk on behalf of the United States or on behalf of Iranian authorities. So no interviews were done for that purpose. But it's really interesting what you say, because the bargaining chip is actually is that jihadi operative who wrote that in his report, that he believes that as of 2003, this is how they wanted, that Iran wanted to use them as a bargaining chip. Now, there is, and this is also not in the document. No. However, there's an illusion that, the book that we talked about earlier, The Exile, they interviewed some US officials who actually dealt with Iranian diplomats immediately after 9/11. And in that book, they mentioned that Zarif, at the time, alluded to a point about something that this could be just one part of the story. Now, what I got from the book on this aspect, and I think Peter may be able to know more about this, that in that immediately after 9/11, I think the Iranians had hoped that the United States would go in on September 12th. And invade Afghanistan. But they were very frustrated with the Americans for not doing that. They also note that Iran actually provided maps of Afghanistan to the US. And so they seem to have worked really, they collaborated at least with the United States. And then, lo and behold, the axis of evil. So it's sort of what my interpretation, and here this is completely speculation on my part, is that since all these jihadis had been welcomed immediately after 9/11, if they've been welcomed in a nice way to be processed and so on, perhaps some more senior jihadis would come through. And this would be something that Iran would be able to put on the card, on the table, in its relationship with the US, perhaps as a form of rapprochement that they wanted to have. But that really didn't come through, and what we got is an axis of evil, then the Iraq War, which it was not so much just the United States being in Iraq nearby, but it was Zarqawi going after the holy sites, the Shia holy sites, and they really wanted to make use of this now, of these detainees as a bargaining chip. Yeah.
This gentleman here.
Thank you very much. Mark Katz from George Mason University. Really fascinating presentation. And I like how you essentially let Al-Qaeda speak and listen to its voice. My question is, you presented that they obviously had a very hostile, negative image of Iran. Was there anything in the documents that you saw that indicated that they were planning, thinking about, considering any actions against Iran? In other words, if Iran had done all these hostile things to them, were there conditions in which they might retaliate or do anything, and what might those have been? Thank you.
They did consider that, but not for the moment. They said, Iran is a postponed enemy, and at one point, this 19-page document, he says, look, all these smuggling money and personnel has recently diminished. The value of it has recently diminished. They weren't probably able to do as much smuggling by that time. And if the Iranians didn't want to, were going to put even more pressure, that they would consider. But to be honest, did they really want to mount something? I don't think so. And I found it, so there is one other document, which is, in one instance, I think that there's a guy by the name Karim, I think it's Abu Hamza al-Muhajir, who was after al-Zarqawi was killed. There were Abu Umar al-Baghdadi and Abu Hamza al-Muhajir, who were the leaders of Al-Qa'ida in Iraq. Actually, they had called it by then the Islamic State of Iraq. And they threatened to attack Iran. And one of the documents, possibly by bin Laden, possibly by somebody else, was furious with them. Saying, and this is really quoted left, right, and center, just so selectively, including by the Arabic press, who should know better. It says, why are you threatening Iran? Don't you know that we use Iran as a passageway to smuggle money and personnel? So that's the end of the sentence, and people quote it and says, well, this is full proof. The second sentence, here's what he says. It's a political liability for you to threaten to attack Iran if you don't carry through with your attack. So I'm not suggesting that you carry out an attack, but if you are really capable of carrying out an attack, I suggest that you don't give them a forewarning. I would attack them, let them figure out that it was you, and then keep going. So there is no friendly reference. And this line is used by most people who use that document really irresponsibly, as if this is Iran. And I find it just, and it is in this report, I include it, but I include what else was being said. So I didn't think that Al-Qaeda was going to, I didn't find any capability or plans for Al-Qaeda to want to attack Iran. In fact, the main plans that were in place, if this is going to take it into a different subject, but this is about Al-Qaeda's operational plans. So there is a figure that I got to know, I don't know if people knew him before, but I got to know him through through the documents, first with the CTC and more with the ODNI's documents, by the name Sheikh Yunus. Sheikh Yunus appears to be a figure that really impressed bin Laden. And impressed him because he wanted to make plans for international operations. And the international operations, by 2010, they were very weak. And we get a letter from Atiyah to bin Laden telling him that our capabilities are pretty weak. Now we're just kind of, we would have, but by God's will, we would be able to do some kind of operations, but it's really weak. But what we get, the communication between Sheikh Yunus and bin Laden, is that there is back and forth about the plan that they're going to do to train people. In that training course that bin Laden is telling Sheikh Yunus, I want you to get the best, the elite. I want you to be able to bring them in, devise a training course, consult with the jihadi brothers in terms of what you're going to teach, and let me have a look at the document, at your proposal before and after you get the feedback, and let's mount, let's put these training together to develop some cadres that we are lacking in order to mount international operations. He goes through the documents to educate Sheikh Yunus about the importance of attacking the United States as well as oil resources overseas. What he really wanted is for popular anger in the United States to put pressure on the government to get out of Muslim majority states. And he tells him, he says, in Vietnam, they lost way more soldiers than they lost in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And the only thing that turned the Americans around is the popular anger inside the United States. This is what we need to get to. We need to be able to make enough pressure inside the United States so that they would be able to change their tactics and their policies. But we need to make them suffer and get the popular anger, because in all its wars, the United States did not suffer outside, but it really, their weakness came from within their own popular anger. So he said, this is our main priority, the United States and oil outside, so that the people would become angry. This is the plan that's before the Arab Spring. This is what he had a plan. And there is another document, in fact, possibly before the Arab Spring, in which Sheikh Yunus had reached the border of Iran with 6 jihadis. Atiyah is telling him that we got to the border of Iran. I can't be sure about, because you know how I said in my presentation that they need to be prepared to die if they get captured. And he tells him that we've asked Sheikh Yunus to make a statement about his own about his biography before they enter into Iran, which tells you that this is a treacherous pass going in. And so Sheikh Yunus, from my understanding, and Peter, you may correct me if I'm wrong, he was captured after Abbottabad. But this is a guy, this was going to be the international operations guy. Now, the Arab Spring happened, and you can tell that this really shifted the paradigm of bin Laden. And it was shifting by the day. The notebook that I mentioned in my presentation, it's tome 2 out of, because there is another one earlier. So I don't know what he thought about in the first collection of materials, but this is where you can see bin Laden on a daily basis changing his mind and shifting his strategy.
But just to go to your question, you mentioned Al-Qaeda kidnapped this Iranian diplomat in Peshawar, right?
Yes.
It looks like there was the release of that diplomat precipitated the release of the family members. Is that basically correct? Or, they were using it as leverage.
That was part of it. That was part of it. So certainly, but no attack. But they did. You're right. They did capture the diplomat, and there was an exchange of prisoners, and there was money involved as well. There was $3 million. But there were also, now, was this the only reason that was going on about releasing members? I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
And I think bin Laden's questions to his wife, Hamza, are worth meditating on.
Yeah. So what do you think the answer is?
So if I'm to ask, it's not that why detain them, why did they release them? Now, this is not in the report because as I said, I only looked at the documents. But I do, if I think of the picture from a panoramic point of view, in November 2010, the United States put Jundallah on its FTO list. They were specific about releasing these detainees through Waziristan, heading to Pakistan. So the questions that I don't have answers, but the questions that I would ask what was going on in terms of some of the conversations that were happening between, I'd be very interested, between the US, Pakistan, and Iran. Were there any discussions about how we could start making, because also there were discussions about a new era of US-Iran relationship, were both sides trying to have some kind of distant, friendliness towards a rapprochement? These would be the questions that I would ask, but I don't have an answer.
Gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Wes Morgan with Politico. There's a point in the documents, I think the ODNI release, maybe the CTC release, in the summer and fall of 2010, where Atiyah and bin Laden are corresponding about kind of how bad things have gotten in Waziristan because of the CIA air campaign, how horrible it is there. They can't move around, and they're talking about sort of possible backup places to go. To relocate, some of the brothers they talk about. And they talk about Kunar and Nuristan in Afghanistan. They talk about Baluchistan. I think I could be wrong. I think Iran also comes up in that context.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if that's an episode that you examined, or if there's any evidence that anybody was actually sent to Iran as a result of those conversations.
There were other also documents in the ones that were released after that they do mention. Going to Iran is not a secret in these documents, but from what I could tell, that this was not done openly or in coordination with the Iranian authorities. So Iran but also there is another reference which they refer to perhaps sending Hamza, bin Laden's son, perhaps to stay with the tribes in Sindh. Sindh is the Islamic terminology for referring to southwest Pakistan, with the tribes there. So there are many areas that they have that they would like to consider as part of their plans. But yes, at the time, bin Laden was worried. I think he wanted to protect the people who were valuable. He was prepared to be patient before. He didn't want to risk individuals, precisely because the drone campaign was really having major impact on them. At one point, there is another one by Atiyah that was released after the CTC ones, where they were so frustrated with all the other militant groups like the Pakistani Taliban and so on, who are using mobile phones, who are using the internet, and they were so frustrated about this because they can't control them. And he says, the area that was in Mir and Shah, and he says the area is infested with spies, the Pakistani spies, and so on. So yes, but I didn't see anything in collaboration with openly. It could have happened, but I didn't see it in the documents that I.
But the way I read that was like he was thinking it was kind of blue sky. We may have to move. Where can we move? I mean,
Right.
there's no evidence that they did anything. They didn't move to Kunar or further into Pakistan. There's no evidence for that.
No.
If I could ask just a quick follow-up. You alluded to Hamza. Are there other insights in the documents into sort of the whereabouts and activities of Hamza during these years?
So at the time when they were writing, we get a letter from Hamza, and we get a letter from Hamza to his mother, who had reached Abbottabad, and another letter to his father. He wants to get together with his father. They want to talk about, Islamic issues, global issues. Hamza, as you know, has been releasing public statements. In those letters in 2010 and 2011, he was very enthusiastic. He wanted to train, and he told his father, I want to be treated like any other jihadi. I want to be on the battlefield, and he didn't want to be treated any more favorably than the others. Now, Atiyah, I think he was a little bit concerned about Hamza, and possibly even bin Laden, because in that, Hamza tells him, that this is what he wants training, etc. And in the document transcribing the conversations in the bin Laden household, it's either summarizing Atiyah's letter or noting what he's going to respond, because it says, yes, but duna tawassu', in other words, within limits. You want to understand this, let him do some sit-ups in a basement or something. Let's not endanger him. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of, they want to train him, but they're worried.
Gentleman here.
The guy next to
John
me,
Limbert,
sorry.
retired Foreign Service. Thank you again for an excellent presentation. I'd like to follow up on Barbara Slavin's question a little bit, more specifically the period around 2003, 2004, when the U.S. Army had occupied Iraq, including Camp Ashraf, the base of the Mujahideen Khalq. And if you found anything in the documents that went beyond, it was more specific, they were more specific about than just bargaining chips, but that would cast light on this report that there was talk of a swap between the Al-Qaeda people in Iran and specifically the leaders of the MEK who were in confinement at Ashraf at the time.
That I did not find. In the 19-page document, he does refer to the fact that he believes that the United States had supported Jundullah, or the Ahl, he refers to them as, he doesn't say specifically Jundullah, he says Ahl Sunnah, the Sunni brothers, the Baluch brothers, which I'm assuming it's actually the militant Sunnis who have actually mounted a campaign of terrorism in Iran against Iranian authorities. The operative in the 19-page document who is writing to other jihadi leaders, and he suspects that the United States had supported this group, had tried to enable this group to mount attacks against Iran. Now, I don't know whether it happened or not, but this group was listed by the United States in November 2010 on the FTO list. So, you know, as I said, I can't say anything on the perspective, from the perspective of the United States or from Iranian perspective, but from the documents he suspects that this specific, but not Mujahideen al-Khalq. I didn't come to say, yes.
Thanks. Warren Strobel with Reuters. You sort of alluded to this earlier, but I'm curious, given your research, the translation analysis you did, what you make of the Trump administration's recent comments on the relationship between Iran and Al-Qaeda, specifically referring to things that President Trump and Secretary Pompeo have said. And secondly, there's been some commentary that the CIA release, it was done differently. It wasn't under ODNI auspices. And if I'm correct, the material was given directly to the Long War Journal. There's been some commentary that that was done to push forward a particular narrative. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, given your long history with these documents. Thanks.
You know, as I said, I'm only looking, it's valuable to have the documents. And look, the CTC got an earlier version in 2012, so why wouldn't another outfit get you know, through the Long War Journal? It would have been good, though, if they had done more research. But I think it's also unfair because they gave them 24,000 documents, and I think it's really unfair to make this. Now, did they do it for a political statement? I don't know. My sense is that the administration on this issue, regardless of which administration, I mean, I wouldn't presume to tell them anything about what they plan or what they do, but I do know what they need, and what they need is really a dispassionate analysis of these documents. The relationship between the United States and Iran is clearly important to this administration and to any other administration. So I think that I can say not what they want or what they should do, but we as scholars who are actually, who do our job, we need to give the administration the most objective analysis of these documents possible, because they really need to be armed by the best information that they have at hand. Beyond that, you know, I can't speak on behalf of the administration.
Well, you've defined, in your summary, you said there was no evidence for operational collaboration. So that's a sort of negative definition of this relationship. But if you were to sort of say, to characterize this relationship, is it sort of passive support? I mean, I know it's a hard question to answer because the relationship seemed to have changed and it went on for a long time. But how would you characterize it?
Between Al-Qaeda and Iran, you mean? You know, since 2011 is challenging for me to say.
Based on the documents.
Because I've only covered the 2011. I don't think even, it's not even passive support.
Right.
I couldn't say passive support. They don't like them. They have to deal with Al-Qaeda has to deal with a very difficult situation. And, you know, bin Laden is egalitarian about his jihadis and so on, but it is, I've also sensed in the documents, he really deeply cares about his family.
Yeah.
And his family was really detained by the Iranians, and they had the upper hand. And you can tell, we don't just know it from the Abbottabad papers. We also know, for example, from the intercepted communications that we had from Atiyah and Al-Zawahiri that were sent to Zarqawi back in 2005, warning him about his indiscriminate attacks against the Shiites. And he said, you know, they said, you know, they've got the detainees, they've got Al-Zawahiri specifically told Zarqawi, the Iranians have got more than 100 Al-Qaeda personnel in Iran. Now it's interesting, bin Laden, just to be clear, he did not go out and you know, go after the Iranians, but he did criticize Hezbollah, so they never. I can't see support is not a word that I would use for Al-Qaeda.
What would you
They were in
use?
an impossible situation. They had to make do with a very difficult situation.
Okay. Lady over here.
Thank you. My name's Jillian Burns. I'm a retired Foreign Service officer, now teaching at GW. I have a question. Did you come across anything relating to Al-Qaeda's relationship with Islamist groups operating in Iranian Kurdistan or Iraqi Kurdistan pre-2003, and how they would try to, if they had a relationship, how they try to balance that against the Iranian government, who of course feared the Iranian Kurdish groups operating, extremist groups operating in that territory?
In Iran or in Iraq, or on both? There are references to, are you talking about Ansar al-Islam? This I came across not through Iran, but about the divisions that were taking place in Iraq. Because when Abu Umar al-Baghdadi, I mean, it started before Abu Umar al-Baghdadi and Abu Hamza, but the divisions in Iraq started happening soon after al-Zarqawi became, was accepted into the Al-Qaeda umbrella, and there were serious divisions. And this is an interesting element about bin Laden's leadership, I think. He really wanted to manage differences, and he kept a lid on it for several years. The situation in Iraq was really, and including, he refers to Ansar al-Islam, there, you know, he really wanted all the jihadis in Iraq to unite under one umbrella. So the references were not about Iran per se, but about the Ansar al-Islam and how we're going to unify the banner of jihad in Iraq. And that was a very challenging situation. And he tried to keep, he didn't want to air the jihadis' dirty laundry. And he tried to manage it as much as possible. He was concerned about the public criticism within the jihadi leadership, and he wanted to keep a lid on it. But this is the only reference that in several places on Ansar al-Islam, but not concerning Iran.
Any other questions? Oh, final one here.
Hi, my name is Jack Rapansky, unaffiliated. When did the documents end? What was that date compared to when they were actually captured? And were all these written in Iran and then captured in Abbottabad? Or were any of them written outside of Iran?
So the last reference that we have in Abbottabad is Sunday evening, the 1st of May 2011, hours before bin Laden was killed. So that was the very last thing that we get to hear from there. When did they start? I haven't looked at the entire collection. It is possible that some were not available there. Perhaps not everything was recovered. That document, the transcribed documents of these family gatherings in the bin Laden household, I am pretty sure that there is the first volume of it. That I'm very sure, but I don't know whether it was recovered. And the reason why I'm saying it may not, even though I haven't gone through all the 24,000 PDF files, I suspect that the CIA would have told us about it. They would have included it on their website. So I wonder whether they recovered it or not. It's a handwritten document. It's highly challenging to read. And if I may say something about it, it was, so if you take it for granted that he wrote it, that bin Laden wrote it, you wouldn't understand the thing. You would think that the guy has lost his marbles. It's just like it was, but it's only, you know, as you read through that you find some voices just do not make sense. But these are the news, what is going on the news. And the reason I really triggered probably halfway through, bin Laden, during the Arab Spring, he had started reading a book by somebody called Majid al-Kilani. The book is about how to reclaim the generation, how to renew the generation of Saladin and reclaim Jerusalem. I haven't read that book, but this really made a huge impression on bin Laden. And so he told his family members that they should read it. And I'm really grateful he did that, because at a certain page, this is when his daughter is summarizing some pages that she read from that book, and she says, Ana azima, which is the declension, the feminine declension. Gosh, a relief. Now I understand that this is not, you know, now I can start understanding that this is, because it wasn't making sense. And she comments on that book. And then, you know, you could tell, I mean, in instances, you know, there are question, answer, voices that may be Al-Qaeda, voices that may not be Al-Qaeda. And then this is really, it starts to make sense, and you want to reread it and start making, you know, start reading it. But the other challenging part about it is that, you know, the person is transcribing these conversations. It's very quick, and sometimes they're not finishing all the sentences because they assume what the end of the sentence is. So you have to kind of try to guess. And, you know, at one point there was a, you know, one of the documents is a long speech, public statement that bin Laden wanted to release back in 2007. It never came out. And now is the time he says, should we now release Bayan al-Iman, which if I hadn't read that document, I wouldn't know what he was talking about, the public statement on faith. And so you find these, it's very challenging to be able to understand it coherently from beginning to end. But it's a very valuable document. It is really being a fly on the wall in the bin Laden household.
Well, thank you, Nelly. Brilliant presentation.
Thank you.